Good morning. One of my message today is going to be about one of the biggest debates between Christians. That is whether or not women can serve as pastors. Due to past times, whenever our culture was sexist towards women, being that they were second-class citizens, this is a very sore subject between other Christians. I need you to understand that this is not a male versus female scenario. Plenty of women I know believe that they cannot serve as pastors, just as there are men who believe women can and should serve as pastors. This is not a matter of discrimination. This is a matter of biblical interpretation. Go with me to 1 Timothy, the book of 1 Timothy, chapter 2, verses 11 through 14. Our text this morning will be verses 12. 1 Timothy 2, verses 11 through 14 says, "Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression." As I mentioned before, this is all about biblical interpretation. Michael Howden said, quote, "The Bible contains God's guidelines for gender roles within His ordered world. Those rules are different, not greater or lesser. Red and green are different colors. One is not greater than the other, but they are used for different purposes. Together they complement each other, filling our world with brilliant color. If everything was red or everything was green, we would not appreciate the beauty of either. So it is with gender comparatism. When men and women work together within their God-designated assignments, God's kingdom flourishes." End quote. So, in the 4 verses I read earlier, God assigned guidelines for the roles that the two genders are to follow. God has commanded through Paul that women are not allowed to have roles in having spiritual authority over men.
Right.
God actually gives his reasoning, notice there, in verses 13 through 14. He says, "For Adam was first formed, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression." Why does God say that women cannot have spiritual authority over men? Because Adam was first formed, then Eve, but it was the woman who was deceived. Now these verses are not saying that women are more gullible than men. It's saying that because of Eve's mistake, women would no longer be allowed to have spiritual authority over men. Look at it like this. If women were more gullible than men after the fall, then why would God command older women to teach younger women who are, by no doubt, more gullible than the older women? And why would they be allowed to teach children who are even more gullible? So it doesn't fit in there. And the reference for teaching young women would be Titus 2, verse 4 through 8. 1 Peter 5, 1 through 4 gives the qualifications for an elder. The Greek word for elder is in the masculine form, presbyteros, which means a seasoned male overseer. While the female version of the word is not used to reference an elder. Now, by no doubt, there are objections to whether or not to the belief that women cannot serve as pastors. I have 6 or 5 with me today that I'm going to sift through, and I'll explain why they're wrong. So number 1, Paul restricted women from having a pastoral position because first century women were commonly uneducated. Now, this is wrong for 2 reasons. One, if this is true, why didn't Paul mention their educational status? And number two, if formal education was a requirement, the majority of Jesus' disciples would be unqualified.
Correct.
Now, number two, second objection is the Greek word suggests that Paul was only referring to husbands and wives. Now, this is simply a matter of Greek interpretation. If you look there, it's still in our same chapter, 1 Timothy 2. I'll read verses 8 through 9. I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair or gold or pearls or costly array. So see, it wouldn't make sense for women and man there to be translated into husband and wife. While it could be translated into that, the context would not suggest any reason to do so. Furthermore, no credible Bible version has it changed to husband and wife. So, number three, objections to why people say that women can't be pastors. Number three, in the book of Acts, number 18 through 18, Priscilla's named, well actually let's go there. Acts 18, verse 18. And Paul, after his tarried there yet a good while, and then took his leave at the brethren, and sailed thence into Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Centuria, for he had a vow. Now when Priscilla and Aquila are being presented as good Christians, Priscilla's name is mentioned first. Now, some people evidently say, well, Priscilla must have been more faithful than her husband. This does not make sense at all, because in the same chapter, verses 2 and 26, the order is reversed. Okay, so there's absolutely no reason, there's no logical reason as to why this would be true, because the order is reversed. Now, let's say that it is. Priscilla was more faithful. We're never given any evidence that Priscilla leaded or pastored or any ministry over men. She was not involved in any ministry activity over grown men. Now the fourth objective is using Old Testament female leaders as an example. Deborah and others. While it's true that these females still stand as examples of strength, courage, and leadership, faith, this is irrelevant to New Testament churches. What they did in the Old Testament is irrelevant to New Testament Baptist churches.
Sure.
Now, the fifth objection is perhaps one of the most common. It is the most common that I researched, and it is that since Paul was writing to the church of Ephesus, he was only referring to the women of Ephesus. Because at this time, Ephesus was widely known for his temple to Artemis, the false god Artemis. Now here's the catch. The false god Artemis the temple was almost nearly controlled by women. And so the story goes that Paul was just reacting to the latest heresy of his day, and that the Christian church needed to be different. As we're told in Ephesians 2:10, Christians must be separate from the world. So perhaps he was just saying that the Christian church needs to be different than the pagan god for Artemis. However, however, my research has shown that this is not true because, number one, I have two reasons again. Number one, Paul never mentioned the Artemis worshippers for grounds on God's reasons. God gives his reasons in the last two verses. Remember? And never once did he mention the false god Artemis as grounds for his reasoning. He gave his reason that it was because of the original sin Eve had, and that's why women cannot have spiritual authority over grown men. Number two, the book of Timothy never mentions this Greek god. So that concludes my defense against 5 common objections to why women can serve as pastors. So, as conclusion, in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 through 14, God, through the Apostle Paul, gives the limit of how women can teach and act during church. There is no scripture forbidding women to teach children. There's no. This passage only limits women from having spiritual authority over men. Women can spread the good news of Jesus Christ, as Jesus gives everybody in Mark 16:15. Some women may feel they're being called to pastor. In many cases, they might do better than some men. However, if a woman takes a pastoral or spiritual authority over men, she is disobeying God's divine order he placed for us in 1 Timothy. Thank you, and the Lord bless.
I'm with it.